that they will present actually results of the survey and the study that they run, the empirical study that they run throughout this period. I would just like to go briefly through a presentation for those that they are not familiar with, but I hope most of you are a bit at least, with the Public Sector Tech Watch. So the Public Sector Tech Watch is the observatory that we established, and it's running since November last year. And actually, it's an observatory where you can find more than 1,000 use cases on AI, emerging technologies like blockchain, virtual worlds, and others, and it will be further populated in the coming future. We're focusing, of course, on emerging technologies and the implementation, piloting, or development even of these solutions in collaboration with the private sector of these solutions in the public administrations. So for whom is this? It's of course for all public officials, for policymakers, companies, even academia, where they do analysis based on these results and the data that we have. And why it has been created, of course, it's just to increase visibility of these use cases, to promote the use of emerging technologies in the public sector, and to disseminate knowledge about it, and also to create a community that we exchange ideas and we start discussions about it. The yesterday, as you can see, it is the AI Watch of it's a study of JRC with around 800 cases that actually fueled initially the Public Sector Tech Watch. We had also another community, the Innovating Public Sector Observatory. Actually, this is the updated version of it. And of course, we have other scientific reports and studies like the one today that we're going to discuss about it in a few minutes. So the Public Sector Tech Watch, what it offers. It's, as we said, it's a community where people they can join, have a say, let's say, in their news, read about events and our news, report their cases, and also what we offer, it's a new opportunity to participate in the Best Case Awards. That it's an event or like a competition, I would say, that normally it will take place in October. So people, they will have the opportunity, digital agencies, of course, and private sector in collaboration with public administrations. You have the chance to submit your cases by mid-July this summer. And yeah, the results and hopefully the ceremony will take place in October. Something to anticipate in, I guess, the end of the week, or hopefully the end of the week, otherwise next week. It's the report that we developed, and it's at its final stage of analyzing the use cases that we had until, I think, February, and also providing some recommendations on the Public Sector Tech Watch. As I mentioned, this is the first seminar of a series of seminars that we're gonna run. In May, actually, there are the two others. One is on the 16th of May, GovTech in Europe. So we dive deep into the GovTech community and the GovTech society with critical information factors for cross-border GovTech practices. So it's more about challenges and also how public administrations they can take advantage of GovTech opportunities. And on the 27th of May, we have the what factors influence perceived AI adoption by public managers. And actually, this is time for you also to participate, at least not in the results that we most probably not present there, but they will come up later on, most probably September. But it's a call for you to be part of the second webinar, at least not directly, but indirectly in the future, by scanning and participating in the survey, completing the survey. So we aim to run the survey, I think, until mid-July. We want to be aligned in this, so people they have their vacation. There is this period of people during summer that of course they are not there, so we want to give the opportunity to everyone, equal opportunity, and most probably we run this until mid-July, and the results they will be presented in due time. You will be informed, most probably September, October. So at this stage, I don't know if there are any questions, if I can take some, otherwise I can just directly give the floor to our experts, Ronnie and Patrick. Should I stop sharing? I think I will do this directly, and then the floor is yours, guys.
All right. Thank you very much, and welcome again to everybody to this webinar today. As anticipated, what we're going to do today is mainly twofold. We'll explain and provide the results of some research that we have been doing regarding competencies and governance practices for AI in the public sector. And then we will also have a panel discussion at 11 o'clock where experts will be asked to bring in their opinion and also comment on the results of the study that we had. So this is the agenda for today. What I would like to do is to start presenting the findings by giving you some background on this study that we had commissioned by the Joint Research Center. Ronnie Medaglia, professor from Copenhagen Business School, has been working together with Patrick at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. We joined forces to have an understanding of what are the needs for competencies on the one hand by public servants in Europe, and also what are the occurring and needed practices of governance related to managing and implementing AI in the public sector. So we've carried out this empirical study whose results we now anticipate, but of course will be later published officially as a report, as a Science for Policy report by the Joint Research Center. So the starting point has been a three-step methodology that we had. In the first step, we carried out a comprehensive literature review with a twofold goal. On the one hand, we wanted to understand what were competencies and governance practices according to scientific research. So we carried out a keyword search in major journals related on the one hand to public management, on the other hand to the information systems literature of empirical studies that related to the adoption, implementation, and design of AI in the public sector. On the other hand, we focused on research and white papers, policy document, gray literature published by governmental agencies, but also published by think tanks, for instance. And we follow here a snowball approach where we try to identify relevant studies, and then based on the ones that these studies refer themselves, then we kept going until we reached saturation. So as a result, we parsed 48 unique documents, and we analyzed those to sort of get the state of the art of what are needed competencies and governance practices for AI in the public sector. Now, moving away from the desk research, then we wanted to obtain some feedback, not only on the results of this state-of-the-art analysis that we had, but also to start getting input on what are missing competencies, what are missing governance practices that have not been captured so far in research and policy documents. So in October, we organized an expert workshop online where 40 experts participated. These are either public managers across different levels in Europe or experts from academia and other people interested or involved in AI projects in the public sector from all over Europe. And we organized them in 4 breakout sessions so that they could have both some peer learning and then also report back to us. And we also then documented this in a report. The third step of this research journey has been the case studies. So drawing on the knowledge that we had from the literature review and from the feedback of the expert workshop, we identified 7 cases in the Czech Republic, in Denmark, Germany, Greece, Italy, Norway, and the Netherlands, where we have identified key informants in different government agencies in these countries, and we conducted 19 semi-structured interviews for more than 11 hours of recordings. These interviews were aimed at identifying what are the perception of needed competencies for AI in the public sector, but also what are existing and needed governance practices and governance structures in each of these agencies that are dealing with the challenges of adopting AI for public services. So these interviews have then been coded and analyzed, and together with the result of the first 2 steps, we have then identified the key findings that come across these combination of desk research and field research that we're going to publish soon. So I would like to tell you a little bit about some of the key findings from this work on competencies that we had. And after me, Patrick will take over and discuss the part on governance practices. So the reason for focusing on competencies is not surprising and comes from evidence of empirical research, and it's the fact that public managers often experience having limited expertise in relation to AI technologies. And public agencies tend to lack competent figures to harness the benefits of AI technology. So our first goal was to provide a definition of the scope of our research in relation to competencies. When we talk about AI competencies, our unit of analysis was the individual. So here we're talking about knowledge, skills, and behaviors that are visible in an individual related to managing and implementing AI for public services. So this also includes individual underlying attributes such as individual traits, motives, but also attitudes and values and self-image. So we also like to go in depth to identify all the different layers that are related to competencies that could be linked to AI in the public sector. So overall, by scoping the literature, by obtaining feedback from the expert group, and by delving in the 7 case studies, we have identified a series of competencies that for which we have provided a specific definition. And these competencies are clustered in 3 macro competency areas. The first one is the one of technology-related competences. Those are all competencies that are related to engaging with the technological elements, having technological skills related to AI in public sector. The second cluster is related to managerial competencies. These are competencies related to managing within the organization, dealing with managing people's resources, and so forth. And the third cluster is related to policy, legal, and ethical competencies. These are competencies that individuals have to have in relation to regulation, for instance, compliance, but also ethical and responsibility definition in an organization when dealing with AI in public sector. So these 3 competency areas, in our analysis of them, we also have identified that they are layered in 3 dimensions that come across the 3 clusters. On top, you have what we call attitudinal competencies. So this is the ability to articulate why. We call them know why type of competencies. So these are related to values, attitudes, and individual traits towards AI in the public sector. The second dimension is the one of operational competencies. These are the classic know-how competencies, the ability to carry out specific tasks needed for the management and implementation of AI in the public sector. The third lever is a know what type of competencies. We call them literacy competencies. Those are competencies related to factual knowledge about specific aspects of AI in the public sector. So with these three clustering and these with three dimensions, we were able then to group each of the individual items of competencies across a 3x3 matrix. So the first dimension, the first cluster, the one of technological competencies, distinguishing between attitudinal competency, such as, for instance, the level of inquisitiveness that an individual has towards technology, or the level of positive attitude towards AI. Then as you go down in the operational type of competencies, you have all these technology related competencies that are related, for instance, to dealing with data. So the ability to collect data, the ability to model data, the ability to assess the quality of data needed, for instance, to train AI systems. Literacy competencies in the technology cluster, on the other hand, are related to the understanding of some key components of AI. For instance, the ability to understand the fundamentals of machine learning, the ability to understand natural language processing. So this mapping of competencies that come both from analyzing the existing literature and from the case studies that we had was exemplified in some very, very interesting highlights that we have bumped into when talking to people that are facing the challenges of adopting AI. So for instance, this is a quote from one of our interviewees in relation to the key literacy competency in the technology domain of understanding the fundamentals of natural language processing. In this case, the interviewees told us you need to understand how and why. Here we were talking about large language models such as ChatGPT is answering wrong. If you don't understand that, you will be afraid of it and say it can take over the world. But you just need to understand that it's just a system for predicting the next word. It doesn't have a mind. So in this case, key literacy competency assumes a great value of equipping the public manager to understanding not just the potential of the technology, but also its limitation, and also has an impact on the attitude towards it, which is not, in this case, negative or apocalyptic, but is much more constructive. The other cluster that we had was the one of managerial competencies. Here, it's interesting that both parsing the literature and listening to people talking to us in the case studies, we identified a group of competencies that are attitudinal, related to values and personal traits, such as leadership, risk proclivity, multidisciplinarity. We identified also operational competencies, such as the ability to coordinate between groups, change management, developing partnership, the ability to choose when to delegate to artificial intelligence systems. But we were not confronted with specific literacy competencies related to the management cluster. Here, talking to people that deal with the challenges of AI was very interesting to find some highlights of what are considered most important of these group of managerial competencies. So for instance, one of the things that we bumped into was the key role of these operational competency in the managerial cluster that we call cross-team collaboration. So here the interviewees was telling us we really need people that can understand the organizational problems and needs. The technicians, they're usually not very good at that. So we need them to go into a dialogue with the different departments. So we call this cross-team collaboration, and it's an operational competency that has an implication for the ability of each public organization to basically pull together skills that are available in different parts of the organization, but also for the need to individuals to be able to talk across organizational boundaries and across disciplinary boundaries as well. This is something that organizations are struggling with, and we have identified as really important. The last cluster is the one that we call policy, legal, and ethical. Here we have competencies identified at each level. So we have purely attitudinal competencies, such as, for instance, empathy, or the ability to assess critically the technology, but also things such as the awareness of environmental sustainability implications of AI solutions. Then we have operational competencies, such as the ability to formulate policies that are compatible from the get-go with AI, but also the ability to do auditing and the ability to do dissemination and public relations related to AI. From a literacy point of view, we have extremely important literacy capabilities that are, on the one hand, purely legal. So, for instance, literacy in AI procurement, or the understanding of the rapidly evolving legal framework around AI, but also some related to having an awareness of ethical implications. So sort of more a philosophical literacy competencies related to this cluster. What was interesting here was to see that one of the things that many interviewees are struggling with is the challenges of the procurement of AI. This is a whole set of competency dimension in itself. In the words of one of the interviewees, what's extremely important is the ability to be critical towards these IT vendor companies that are emerging now with the boom of AI applications. A public manager needs to understand what their interests are of these IT vendors. And they also have to have the technical competency to actually compare what they're offering to someone else. It's very easy to be stuck in this principal agent problem where there's an information asymmetry and also a competency asymmetry between the public organization and the potential IT vendor. So AI procurement literacy really emerged among one of the key competencies that we ascribe in our framework to the policy, legal, and ethical cluster of competencies related to AI. So as a result of this exercise, we have then developed a comprehensive framework for AI in the public sector, which has as vertical clustering the three clusters of technology competencies, managerial competencies, and policy, legal, and ethical competencies. And then across these, we have the three levels of attitudinal competencies related to know why, the operational competencies related to know how, and the literacy competencies related to know what. What we also sort of theorize here is the mutual influence of these different layers with each other. Operational competencies are affected on the one hand by attitudinal competencies, because when embedded in the organizations, individuals have to carry out tasks related to implementation and management of AI. Obviously, they are influenced by the values that they are equipped with. And therefore, we posit that attitudinal competencies sort of shape the operational competencies. On the other hand, these operational competencies are also shaped by the know what of each individual. So literacy competencies related to basically knowing some specific knowledge about AI in the public sector are the ones that shape the ability to then operationalize these competencies. And that's why we posit that literacy competencies have an influence on operational competencies. So based on this framing that we have that draws on the empirical research, then we set some recommendations that stem from our way of looking at the challenge of developing competencies according to this framework. So we have three recommendations at this stage. The first one is there's a really need to develop focused AI training programs. This is because not only there's a lack of know what competencies, but also because at all level of competency, there's a need to train and to form the public managers of the future in order to not just tap into new knowledge related to AI management in the public sector, but also to be able to tap into the existing knowledge in the organization that sometimes it's not just adequately circulated. The second one, it's something that reflects our own experience with the literature review, for instance, and with facing the state of the art of academic literature, which is the need to promote research on AI competencies that is interdisciplinary. There are islands of knowledge about what's important in competencies related to the AI in the public sector, but sometimes they are not talking to each other. So you have research in the public management discipline that sometimes is unaware of research in the information systems discipline. And as a result, we have the need for increased synergies and also increased depth into the studies. We are now moving away from position papers and more theoretical speculative papers about AI in public sector in academic research towards more empirically based paper, but we are a long way to go to really have a solid body of knowledge. And this is really a window of opportunity that we have to stimulate this type of research that is multidisciplinary in nature. The third one is related to what we heard a lot from the organizations that we talked to, which is the difficulty to attract talent that has AI competencies and the difficulty to identify specialists with AI competencies that are really satisfying the requirements of public sector. So for this end, we recommend that dedicated hiring processes are established for public organizations that deal with AI, and also exceptional resources should be devoted to attracting specialists with AI competencies, especially in a market where public organizations with limited budgets are often struggling with attracting AI specialists that from private corporations are offered jobs very quickly and with very attractive compensations. So there's a need really in Europe to be able to attract these talents before they are siphoned straight into the private sector and therefore are not able to contribute to this swiftly developing field. So with this, I would like to give the floor to Patrick, who then can tell us about research on the governance practices side of what we have been doing.
Okay, thank you very much, Ronnie. I'm just making sure that I have control of the slides.
You working?
No, let's try one more time. Yeah, I think it should be working now. Okay. Okay, apologies for this technical blip. Good morning, everyone. My name is Patrick McAuliffe. I'm a professor in the Department of Computer Science of the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. And as Ronnie mentioned, we've been working on this study for the last few months. I'll be presenting the part about governance structures. And the key difference here is that we're talking mostly about effects that are understood or are applicable at the organizational level, not at the individual level. And I think an important thing to highlight here is that when it comes to governance practices and competencies, these are not things that are independent. There's a high degree of dependency between the two. And I can explain why. So first of all, a lot of the things that we found in the governance structures here are dependent on people that have the necessary competencies to be able to actualize them. So for to be able to realize the practices and the processes that are entailed in AI governance in the public sector, you do need people with the right competencies, as were the ones that Ronnie described.
Sorry, Patrick. Sorry for the interruption. Your slide doesn't seem well fitted. It's quite tiny. If you can zoom in, or because
yes, I'll try. Okay. It's very difficult because I don't really have control over it. Let's see.
Yeah, if you continue scrolling or something, because
maybe it's easier if I just give control back to Ronnie and Ronnie can.
Okay, now it's fine.
Yeah, Ronnie, can you change the slides? When the time comes, I'll ask you. Okay. Okay, this is to the previous slide. Thank you very much. So what I was mentioning here is that there is quite a large dependency between governance structures and competencies. And on the other hand, governance can be used as a way of kind of updating, understanding skills and retraining personnel within public bodies. So there is a big degree of dependency, just to keep that in mind. So the second reason why we looked at governance practices is that there's a lot of discussion about how important AI is from a technical point of view, but also what are the potential risks and threats it can pose. So understanding how to govern it in public bodies is not only a task of being able to align it with what the organization is doing and needs, but also being able to minimize or mitigate as much as possible any risks or ethical concerns that are tied to it. Go to the next slide. In addition to this, what we've seen, at least from early studies and from things that we've been doing during this study, is that many organizations in the public especially are facing some really large challenges of adopting AI. And this can be seen for many different reasons. In this really nice article, I think it's visualized quite well, that on the one hand, we have AI, where it's a set of technologies that are very broad, very diverse. They're like developing very fast at huge paces. They require agility and flexibility. They require a lot of risk taking. And these kind of attributes of the technology itself are often quite contrarian to what's happening in public organization, where you typically have quite rigid structures. You have a lot of formal processes. There's control from different agencies and at different levels. So there's this tension that needs to be dealt with. And this is why, one of the reasons why AI governance practices are important in order to kind of alleviate these tensions. In addition to this, there's oftentimes a number of barriers that are very dependent on the organization itself. So things that have to do with the technology know-how, with the people's know-how, with the history of technology use, with the regulations, with the environment, with the relationships with the external stakeholders. And all these factors come into play when technology adoption is concerned. So what is needed here and why AI governance is important is that it provides a kind of like a roadmap or a set of practices that are there to guide and manage how technology will be aligned. So next slide, please. What we did when we started looking at the data is that we followed a completely inductive approach. So as Ronnie mentioned, we followed the three-phase approach when looking at the findings. We didn't have any specific framework in mind before we analyzed the data, but what came up was kind of coherent with what we see in information technology literature. And what we try to do in the governance practices is that we organize them according to what we saw in the data and what we've seen in past frameworks. So this is a kind of like an old type of framework when it comes to how we can understand what governance entails. And the aspects of it and the dimensions which it builds on are that we need to define structures. What that means is that there needs to be assigned roles and responsibilities. There needs to be different departments and different organizing structures in the organization that deal with technology. We need to have processes, and these processes define a little bit how things are done, like what is the sequence of activities, what are the best practices, if we conform to any standards or so on, and how do we ensure that the process is rolled out and done according to best practices. And finally, we have what are called relational mechanisms, and these define how exactly people and departments within an organization and throughout an organization connect, interact, and how we, for example, provide incentives, how do we train people, how do we keep them motivated, how do we build trust. And all these three dimensions combined together are different aspects of what we would call governance. So when analyzing the data, we try to position our findings within each of these three pillars. But in the same time, we realize that these three pillars are not sufficient enough to be able to provide something that's coherent and readily usable from public bodies. So next slide, please. Then what we did is that we solved the data and we identified that there's different levels of decision making in public organizations, and the findings that we had and the data that we found in the empirical studies also mapped onto three different levels of decision making. So on the one hand, we had three different pillars of governance. On the other hand, we had three different levels of decision making. And what we saw is that some of the practices in terms of governance have to do with strategic decision making, so things that have to do with the long-term picture, like, for example, decisions that have an impact in the next 2 to 5 years plus. Ones that were done, that are done usually at the higher level of management in public organizations, and ones that basically try to identify what is the right direction that the organization should be focusing on in the long term. Then a level below that, we have tactical practices and tactical decision making, and this is usually done at the department level. So these are a bit more specified on what specific department within public administration is dealing with AI adoption and use. They typically concern middle management decisions, and they try to align the activities that are done on the strategic level with what is done in the department level. And finally, at the lower level, at the operational level, these have to do with decisions and activities concerning governance that have to do with the everyday, day-to-day operations. So they're a bit more detailed. They focus on specific processes and outcomes, and they're usually decisions or practices that are adopted or implemented by execution teams and managers at the lower level. So all of these are basically a way of stratifying, if one could say, the different practices that AI governance is concerned with. Next slide, please. So what we did is we plotted these dimensions. So we came up with this framework where on the vertical axis, we have the different elements of governance. So procedural practices, structural practices, and relational ones. And horizontally, we have the three different levels. So the strategic level, tactical, and operational. And what we did is we fit the data or the data fit itself naturally in this kind of matrix. And we presented this framework as a means to show that it's important to think about procedural, structural, and relational on all different levels. There isn't any specific emphasis on one particular dimension of governance on any level. But there's also quite important dependencies between the different levels of decision making. So that's why we have these arrows. So, for example, strategic level decisions need to be implemented on the tactical level, and then they are actualized on the operational level. In the same time, though, there needs to be a feedback mechanism where things that are happening on the operational level kind of feed back up, and there is a revision of what governance practices are suitable and work well for the public organization. Next slide, please. This is basically the results plotted on the previous framework. And what we see here is that there's a whole different set of practices, each of them corresponding to a specific quadrant or part of the matrix. So, for example, when we look at the top level of strategic level decisions, we identified aspects such as, for example, developing ethical AI guidelines. So how exactly should AI be treated in an ethical way, and what procedures do we follow from a strategic level? At the same time, when we look at the structural part, we see that there's something quite similar there, but there is quite a difference in it. So, for example, there is a bullet point about establishing independent ethics committees. So this hints to a specific structure and roles and responsibilities that need to be established on the strategic level that have some kind of an impact also of how we develop ethical AI guidelines. Another thing that we saw, for example, in the relational practices on the strategic level is that it's very important for public bodies to establish communities of practice. So going beyond their focal boundaries and looking at what other relevant public organizations or private bodies or other independent organizations are there in order to be able to develop a forward-looking plan around AI. So when we go down the different levels, the tactical level, we see, for example, things that are a bit more applicable to departments. So, for example, how do we minimize authorization to access data? How do we develop explainability frameworks? So these can be very specific to specific departments where there is a different need and a different focus of AI. Structural practices, for example, at the tactical level about how do you develop a steering group in that department to ensure that what you're doing with AI aligns with what the group needs to be doing, and how do you define project ownership, and then negotiating and contracting with vendors, for example. And finally, down on the operation level, we have things that are a bit more on the nitty-gritty details of managing AI. So, for example, how do you manage your data? How do you establish system and data integration? And one can also read this framework in terms of different themes. So there's obviously themes around ethics. There's themes about data management and handling data. There's themes about cybersecurity and privacy. So it's interesting to see that despite the fact that we've organized it in this kind of matrix plot, there are different emerging themes that come in the data, and these can be applicable to different roles within public bodies. I know time is pressing, so I'll just move on to the next slide. And you will obviously receive the report of the full findings and what each of these means in detail, as well as the quotes of respondents around them. But what we came up with were a series of recommendations. These are just some of them that emerged from the study, and some things that were highlighted as very important by the respondents and from our bibliographic search. So the first one was it was very important for many public organizations to develop communities of practice. This was because the technology itself is quite broad. It's a broad set of technologies, actually. So when it comes to developing, implementing, understanding how exactly you can use it and what kind of threats and value it has, there is a best way of doing that is to be able to team up or to gain knowledge from other organizations that are in similar positions or that ones that can actually provide this knowledge. And this is a way of significantly reducing barriers and the uncertainty that comes with AI adoption. The second one, which was highlighted quite a lot, was that it's important for governments and for public bodies to provide guidelines. And when we talk about guidelines, this is about how exactly public bodies should try to engage with AI, guidelines about what kind of education they would need. So this goes back a little bit to what Ronnie presented before. Having seminars about best practices and use cases, having expert consultations, and also providing a bit of insight about how to interpret the different regulatory frameworks around, for example, the AI Act, the Data Act, and so on. These were very important, and they were highlighted as being a significant factor of being able to actually utilize AI in practice and going just beyond the experimentation phase. The third recommendation, and this is just a subset of quite a few that we have in the report, is that it was very important for public bodies to have stakeholders in the loop. So basically, what they were highlighting is that it's important to have communication channels with all the relevant stakeholders, whether those are citizens, whether those are businesses, whether those are other public bodies, to be able to include them during the design, development, and implementation of AI. Simply because there is a lot of uncertainty around AI technologies, and there's a lot of distrust by people, especially by the end users. So having a clear channel of communication with them and trying to explain to them how things work, what exactly goes into an output, how decisions are made, what kind of data are utilized, is a very important part of making them more readily adopted by the broader community. So with this, I'll close my presentation on the side of governance practices, and I hand back the floor to you, Ronnie.
Yes, thank you very much, Patrick. And as we plan, we have now a 10-minute break. It is 10:50, so we'll come back in 10 minutes, where at 11 we will start with the expert panel, where Sven will take over and we'll have a discussion, which will also open up to the rest of all the participants. But more details on this, enjoy your coffee and stretch your legs, and we'll meet in 10 minutes at 11 sharp. Thank you very much.
Hello and welcome back from the break. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second part of the webinar on competencies and governance practices for AI in the public sector. Before the break, you already heard from both Ronnie and Patrick about the study done with Digit and the JRC. And now we'll go into a more interactive part of today's webinar. My name is Sven Schade. I'm with the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, and we are collaborating with Digit and then also with Ronnie and Patrick in this work you just heard about. And I'm leading the team here. We're looking into digital transformation in public governance and the changing role of public institutions. So we have a very dedicated Science for Policy team here in the JRC that is dealing with the topics presented in this webinar and many more. But now for today, it's really my pleasure to welcome our dear panelists, because we have three very interesting people today with us. We have Christina Welser, the head of Education and Knowledge Center of the municipality of Gladsaxe in Denmark. Then we have Lendert Wienhoven, hopefully also with us, a data scientist from the municipality of Trondheim in Norway. Welcome also to you. And then we have Zara Giest, a professor from Leiden University in the Netherlands. So here we are with our three excellent speakers. Before we start, just that you know, we will have some time that also you can ask your questions from the audience. In order to do so, please use the chat. You can actually write down a question now at any time. We have Ronnie with us, which will moderate a bit the chat, and we will then actually collect questions throughout the entire discussion. And then after we got started, get back to the most popular questions in a little bit. So please do use the chat functionality. Put in your questions as they come to mind. We will get back to those as much as possible with the time that will be left after the first few rounds of questions. I think with this, we are already all set. So I already introduced the panel very, very briefly, but of course, we want to hear more from you than from me. And therefore, I would kindly ask our dear panelists to give a quick few words introduction about yourself, who you are, where you come from. But then please already answer our first question, and this is about the main challenges. So which challenges do you see in developing competences for individuals to actually work with AI in the public sector? So with this, I stop and I hand over to you. Maybe Christina, we start from you, please.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Christina. I am the leader of a Pedagogical Knowledge Center, where we work on all the planned different parts of the organization, developing learning technologies and testing new ideas and working with innovation. And of course, there's a lot of challenges with all new things. And one of the things about AI for us, it seems that it's time, the time issue, as you've pointed to as well, because the development and everything, every day you open something new and it's like, whoa, now you can do this. And you run towards and see, oh, I think this could be used in this area or this area. So if we could just stop time for a wee bit, like for a year, then we would be able to sort of catch up. If that is enough for the first answer.
Absolutely, absolutely fantastic. I think time is indeed an interesting thing, especially as we see the fast development of AI in general, and really a need to catch even up with the latest developments. So thanks for that starter. Then over to Lendert, maybe, if you want to introduce yourself quickly and highlight a few challenges you see.
Sure. Lendert Wienhoven, as you said, data scientist in Trondheim municipality, but I have a history as a researcher in AI. What is interesting from the municipal point of view, we have a lot of different services. We have in Trondheim about 15,000 employees. Some of them don't want to move at all. Some of them want to move too quickly and maybe ignore some laws. So we have the full spectrum of challenges there, and making sure that you provide a platform that actually enables people to do things within the boundaries of the law is quite challenging from the municipal perspective, at least. So yeah, we're going too slow and too fast at the same time.
Interesting. Yeah, this is a wonderful thing if you work with people. No, they're not all the same, indeed. Very good. So then, Sarah, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Sarah Geest, I'm a professor of public policy. I work, as you said, in Leiden. I work on several AI projects, but I always say I'm a data focused person. So I look at data-driven policymaking because the data is what underlies all AI that's out there. And I specifically look at biases in the data that then affect what AI does with the data, basically, and what that does for vulnerable groups. But I want to sort of latch on to what Christina also said about time. So what I see in the research is that people have experiences with AI applications, and that feeds into the trust they have towards these applications. And that also affects the kind of competencies that they're trying to acquire, right? So if they start mistrusting the technology, they might want more knowledge about the technology. But then the missing piece is often also knowing the context that the AI application is being applied to. So the context expert and the AI experts are not always the same. So then you sometimes have a disconnect between sort of this almost aspatial, space-neutral sort of digital infrastructure, and you have place-based knowledge about specific cities, places, municipalities, and then you have sort of a mismatch. And then if you layer on top of that an outsourcing culture, you will never acquire the competencies within government because you now outsourced it to a company that looks at these sort of aspatial infrastructures rather than having the place-based contextual knowledge.
Oh, excellent. I see some nodding there. You want any reactions directly, Christina, Lendert? You want to pick this up? Not immediately. Oh, go ahead, please.
Well, I think one of the things we also experience is as soon as we have experts, as soon as we have some, because it's funny enough, Sarah, it's also our data unit that actually have the experts. They're like really, really clever people, and they can do all fun stuff and program stuff. And what happens is they get picked otherwhere or go other places because it just there's so much need and demand for people who know more. So we can't keep them.
Excellent.
And that is the problem.
Another good point indeed, not only to build the talent, but also retain it in-house. That's a very big one as well. Very good. So I think we already sketched a little bit generally these challenges. But would one or also all of you have some more practical examples or some personal experience or a narrative on these challenges to obtain AI competences within your area of work? You have some examples, anyone? Yeah, Christina, please go ahead.
Well, my specific field is also schools, and what's happening right now is that a lot of teachers are standing there, and all the pupils actually already use all kinds of different, especially language modules, and they're not allowed to, but they do, because you can't stop it. So the teachers are not yet we haven't been able to sort of help them learn like how to use it in the education, how to use how to prompt, not anything. They're just really scared while their pupils run fast. So that's a big problem for our organization, especially in that part.
So you even have these training the trainers in that sense, if I may say so, right?
Yeah.
Why you actually see society or the population jumping on readily available solutions still to catch up in between with the civil servants. Yes. Anything you want to add, Sarah, Lendert? Please go ahead.
Yeah. When you want, I'm leading a group for data analysis and AI in a municipality. We're just a handful of people, and yes, it is very hard to get competent people. We have 7, director areas, I think what they call it. So we have education, healthcare, all that. I'm in organization supporting all of them. However, they also have the flexibility to hire their own. And hiring competence is as difficult as it is to actually hire competent people. So if you don't know who you're hiring for what exactly, because many people have a bit too much faith to AI, is what I want to claim. AI does actually not solve all your problems, even though a lot of vendors want you to believe that. But if you happen to be a manager who believes that AI actually is the solution, and you put out a position and people apply and confirm that, yes, it is a solution, that only works in theory. And once you then start to struggle with the vendor systems that we have, I mean, data is the key to having the possibility to use artificial intelligence. Very much of our data is locked in vendor systems, and you can only get it out at an aggregated level. So what is the value of AI then? Very little. So you need to see the full perspective. And I really like the framework where the division between technology, law, and what was the third axis? And the managers. I mean, all of these perspectives, they are intertwined. And if you miss on one of them, you're prone to fail. But then still now with especially generative AI, everybody all of a sudden is a data scientist because they have used ChatGPT once. And if you then don't have the manager that actually can poke through that, yeah, okay, then you may think you have hired the right person, but perhaps you didn't. So yeah, all of these perspectives, they're quite difficult. I must say. And in addition, in public sector, we also, of course, have legislation far beyond GDPR. I mean, we do have a lot of data. We have the data from birth to grave of all inhabitants. However, we only know your address because we need to send you a bill. We cannot use your address to see that there is a kindergarten nearby that has a position open, and we know you have a kid as well, but we know it because of another reason. So the actual power of AI looking into all of these small silos cannot be used. And that is because of the law and partially the technology. So in theory, yes, we could have a perfect world, but well, practice beats theory.
Very well, very well. You covered a lot of directions, no? But indeed, thanks also for confirming the framework, because indeed it's going well beyond the IT competence. There's a lot of soft skills also associated already to the use of AI. But thanks also a lot for stressing this data dimension, because without the proper access and legal rights to use the data in an appropriate way, any AI solution will actually run in a void. So a really interesting point there. Sarah, you wanted to add some more examples also from your side before we go a little bit more into the governance questions?
Yeah, I want to highlight 2 points, and I think it relates to what Christina and Leonard said, both on the public service side, but also on this idea of efficiency and effectiveness. So there's a lot of front-end focus in the sense that AI will make it faster, it will automate processes, all these kinds of things. But then the back end and the outward facing sort of dimension of that, the public service dimension, makes it a lot more challenging once you have the intersection with students, for example, or citizens. And then what you see if you automate, not even AI, but if you just automate a service, it gets really hard for citizens to then get access to that service if they receive, for example, an automated letter that's a standard letter, and there's no phone number, for example, to access a public servant that would actually talk to them, but they refer back to a chat function, for example, that may be powered by AI. And then there's a disconnect between the front end where you say, oh, it's efficient, we're sending this automatic letter, and the back end where people are like unable to access the public service because they don't have the competencies, or maybe they don't understand what the front end actually did in that process.
Very good. A big pledge to actually take seriously what is really surrounding as this notion of human-centric public services. What does it really mean to be human-centric? Doesn't have to only be limited to more efficiency indeed, but also the human aspect to it, and also physical interaction to a degree, or having a contact person. I think that's another one. But there we are going really opening up a very large discussion on public service and access to public service, which maybe we have an entire other seminar sometime in the future. But it's a very good topic for sure. Very good. I think we're a bit exploring this space of the competency so far. Let's move also a little bit more to the governance and governance practices. So a similar question as before, where do you see the main challenges in really developing governance practices within public organizations working with AI. If you want to say in Europe or with a European context, maybe as compared to other areas in the world. Who is a first taker? We want to start the other way around, Sarah? You want to give it a go, maybe?
Sure. I think there were some very valid points that Patrick made in the presentation, right? About the organization being there for a long time, having sort of a path-dependent setup, having a legacy system potentially, and then you bring in a new technology that needs to find a space where it can actually be used in a good way. So I think sometimes the governance practices want to catch up with that technology, but it's sometimes also healthy to take a step back and ask, is AI actually a solution to the problem? And what is actually the problem we're trying to solve? So to bring back a balance saying, this cannot be solved by AI, that's fine. We can do it a different way. And we have mechanisms in place that can do that. So not the default being AI can solve this, as also Leonard said, that AI is not the solution to everything. So I think that's an important one. And I think as we work with ministries here, it's also really tricky to have sort of a list that you tick off for government practices and saying, look, if you meet all these requirements, you're on a good path, because it's a very dynamic process and you're still dealing with people and different teams that have to work together that maybe have competencies that overlap or don't. So I think being aware that this is a dynamic process that evolves in the organization, in the organizational context, and cannot be separated from the organization or the institution it is embedded in, basically.
Very well. So you're more looking into these, let's say, organizational culture to a degree, to not only look into a quick solution, but also more careful design the public services and also the backend. I think that's an interesting perspective. You want to add on this, Leonard, Christina, who wants to go first?
I can go. Now the AI Act is passed. Norway is not an EU country. It's a part of the European Economic. I always mix up these things. But anyway, the law is not valid for us yet, but it will be. And I think that's a benefit, actually, being in Norway and looking at how you guys deal with it first. Also, we have some more time to prepare, and I like to see legislation as enabling. GDPR is often seen as, no, you cannot do this because of GDPR. So, yeah, but if you actually read it, it opens up. I mean, it was meant to open up, but people use it to close some gaps that actually aren't really there. Also, we have the Data Governance Act coming, the Data Act, Interoperability Act. All of those are very important in combination with artificial intelligence as well. And here, actually, it's a big benefit not being part of the EU, because we can have a little bit more time to learn. Also, preparing for this, I mean, GDPR, all of a sudden, it became, what do you call it, enabled. It has been there for a while before they started actually enforcing it. That was the word I was looking for. And now we know what's coming. So why shouldn't we prepare for the systems, as you were saying, Sarah? If we build for the future, and we already know somewhat the shape of the future, at least from the regulatory side, we can already enforce our vendors to say, we must have APIs, we must have data models, we must have all these possibilities actually to enable the AI. There's so much work that needs to be done before we really can do good AI work. And I think also what is not very clear for everybody, that the public sector has a completely different set of rules compared to the private sector. I mean, everybody who's been using Facebook, Spotify, YouTube, whatnot, you get pretty good recommendations of what you want to see or listen to. However, when it doesn't fit, you just click next, and it doesn't impact your life at all. If you are maybe wanting to build a garage or extend your house, and you file some kind of the proposal to the municipality, and it's got automatically declined because of something, it does impact your life. And we cannot pick our customers, I mean the inhabitants, and they cannot really pick us. Oh, well, you can move to another municipality, but they have the same problems. So it looks like it's just a small nuance, but it's a very big impact by not being able to choose who you can serve and how you can serve them. So yeah, maybe I'm moving a bit outside of the scopes when, sorry.
No, but that's fine. That's fine. I think it's very interesting what you're putting on the table here. Also, pledging for EFTA, no, the European Free Trade Association that Norway is a part of, and actually also the benefit of having a little bit of a distance and first observing what's happening and then benefiting. But you said it already in an answer before that actually this is not the only digital policy, and there are many more, and it's a lot really looking about the different policies around there and making best use of them, and indeed using them as enablers and not as blockages. I think there are a lot of interesting items you were raising, and also underlining the rule of law that the public sector is operating under. I think it's things which really need to be kept in mind very carefully. But with having me speaking less, Christina, also over to you.
Well, sort of, I think we have a big challenge in Denmark, and I don't know how many Danish listeners are here, but it is that the sort of the government and the are not at the moment not that interested in developing sort of on the digital side. So what we see here is our politicians in the municipalities are actually scared of anything that has to do with digital because of all the Chromebook stuff and things. So we are trying to do loads of limiting on what our users can do in the municipalities. At the same time, we're trying to actually secretly developing and looking into all the new stuff. So it's sort of it's very much like two sides. Develop in secret. No, don't think of don't tell the GDPR people, don't tell the politicians, and don't tell anyone who has anything to say, so that you could stop the sort of innovation and playing. And then at the same time, you have to sort of have all the rules in mind, for, as you were talking about, Lena, that are there. So you can't really do anything fun when you have to think of all the rules at the same time. You have to do the fun first, inside the house, not letting any data go out, of course, but and then afterwards you can say, okay, how can we sort of get over this? So we have the ideas, we have the needs from the citizens, and from the challenges, the big problems we have, like children not having not, especially what some of the big things we have and challenges is that young people are not happy. There's a lot of extra money given to getting young people what they need, and also older people, and also like infrastructure and stuff. So there's a lot of things that we have to work with, that we have to find solutions to, but we're not allowed to find the solutions really, because what we have to focus on is not using, not crossing data, not selling things out, not telling any private companies what we do at the same time, and also so there's a lot of I think there's a big gap that we were trying to sort of close and try and explain. We need to have rules or boxes that we can develop inside with the help from the sort of the government plan, but they're not really listening at the moment, I think.
Can I ask a follow-up question, Sven?
Sure, go ahead.
I was wondering, for both Christina and Leonard, what role does statistical offices play in terms of providing data in the level of aggregation that's relevant to the policy sector that you're working in, and whether you're able to exchange data more freely between the statistical offices and the level you work at, basically?
Well, we're not allowed to. But if you have to try something, you have to do something. So on a theoretical, you sort of do it on a theoretical place, and you try things out in a closed system, and then you see, does it work? And then you work towards what can we do to change the ways that we have sort of siloed ourselves. If that answers, I don't know.
I would also like to add up on that. I mean, we have an obligatory reporting to the statistical office. We're not allowed to use these numbers. We don't even know necessarily what we're reporting. It's done automatically, which I think is a bit weird, but that's a different topic. And when it comes back, we don't know exactly how SSB, so the Norwegian Statistical Bureau, has aggregated, combined, contextualized, and all that. One of the most prone cases is sick leave, because Trondheim municipality has one of the highest sick leaves in the country for municipalities. However, when you look at how it is being calculated, we do get differences. So I won't bore you with all the details, but just defining what is a full-time employee. For some, it is someone who's working more than 80%. For another municipality, it is everybody that actually works 100%. And just by this small bit of context, you get changes in the outcome of the percentage of sick leave. And therefore, you cannot say this 8% sick leave is equal to their 8% sick leave. But the problem is that our politicians are governing by that, saying we are higher than, for example, Bergen municipality, which is approximately similar in size. However, they calculate it differently. So how can we say we're higher if you don't know that the numbers are the same? So, and SSB has yet a third one, and I'm taking this because we've actually done a study on this last year. So I know that if you recontextualize our sick leave numbers by the way SSB is looking at it or the way Bergen is looking at it, we get actually 3 different numbers. So we need to compare apples with apples. But if we don't know how they compare, then it's a problem.
Very good, very good. Especially also going back to the data we work with, no? And actually the semantics can be very different, especially if you integrate data from different sources. But also getting back to what Christina said, no, I think also there we also have to consider that we're in a very particular moment, at least in a European context, where a lot of the digital policies were just put on the table and they are now about to be implemented, many of them actually at the same time. So we are actually in a phase of early implementation. But the good news is that we are also in the most recently adopted policies, where we have the AI Act, which is about to be released, and the Interoperable Europe Act, which is entered into force already on the 11th of April. Both of them have these regulatory sandboxing clauses in there. So we'll see. We had a very interesting call yesterday also with College of DG Research, of Digit, of Connect, DG Sante in the health area. There's something similar, very interesting, to actually also create safe spaces for experimentation, where you may even violate certain regulations in a sandbox, which is well defined, to actually test some solutions and innovate. So I think also this is an interesting mechanism, but yet we have to learn how to really implement it. And there are only some examples, some good ones also from Norway and from other countries, how to actually deal with it. But I think we also got a lot of questions in the chat. I will turn into it and look at Ronnie in a second. But before, do you want to add any more examples or again practical experiences, as Lendert already started, more on the governance practice side of things? Anything you experienced on the governance of the use of AI in the public sector you wanted to bring as a concrete case? Otherwise, we will slowly start with questions from our very active audience. There were a lot of things flying in, but give me a second to have a look. Any takers with an example?
Yeah, I just want to add that as a university, we work with ministries, right, to teach competencies, but it's more and more becoming sort of a co-creation process where the government says, these are the competences we need. Do you have the research to sort of teach us what's happening in research? And then this almost being a conversation. So I think we're moving away from the university and the ivory tower teaching ministries, or ministries sort of saying, this is what we need, but actually this co-creation process of figuring out what are the competences that we see now, what are the things we might see for the future, and then work on that together. So I see that happening more and more in sort of the competence space.
Very good, very good. Yeah, Christina, you wanted to jump in?
I just wanted to ask Sarah, competencies for whom? For which level? Or is it for the governmental level or the?
Yes, so this is national government level, people working in ministries trying to figure out how to integrate AI into their
Right.
day-to-day work. But local level is a different story, also in the Netherlands.
Exactly, and I think
Correct.
we can go to different levels maybe in a little bit, but I throw in maybe a couple of questions from the audience. But the first one really related to these AI competencies, so the kind of competences which are not only AI related, but competences for using AI in the public sector. And there was actually a question if there could be any development of a sort of curriculum of these competences for public administration. Do you see any chance to do a standardized curriculum, either standardized for municipalities or for regions, for countries? Lennart, you first, but then of course open to all.
Yes, actually, I'm working in a project where we're mapping courses that are available online specifically for public sector. So everybody knows elements of AI, and this is supposed to be kind of a elements of public AI. I mean, it's not this the working title for now, where we've identified what kind of competencies that are being shown. Some of them are very low level, just a 5-minute video, for example, just to give you a grasp of what's real and what's wrong, because there's a lot of that as well. And not everybody needs to know all these full equations. I mean, you don't need to know how the engine works as long as you can drive the car. That's one of the metaphors that I often use. And this is intended to cater for both. So it will be available after the summer vacation sometime. I'm not sure if we're publishing it in another language than Norwegian, but I'll try to make sure that we do that as well. But some of the content is in English, but not all. So yes, we are working on that. But there is a lot of material out there, and actually checking what is relevant for whom is not a very easy task.
Excellent. No, I think that would be really interesting material for quite a few people. And I think Ronnie wants to chip in. Give me a second, Ronnie, because I think also this discussion you just started, no, these kind of material being available in different languages, being translated, etc., etc. It's opening a very interesting discourse. Before going to Christina and Sarah, Ronnie, you wanted to jump in with anything, or? So you were raising your hand, but you're muted.
Yeah. I just wanted to plug in one of the interesting questions I saw asked in the chat about this, and it seems to be a question directed to me and Patrick, but I would forward it to the panel because the question is really about whether the use of AI, the kind of use of AI in public administration has an effect on the framework of competencies that we've seen. So I think that we can ask the panelists if that is actually the case. So should we think of a framework and a curriculum, for instance, for the use for education purposes, and then another framework and curriculum for the use of AI for welfare service and so on and so forth? Or does the panel envision instead an overarching umbrella type of curriculum, regardless, that is sort of agnostic to the use? I'm sort of strategically using the panelists for a question that I was actually to us as authors of the study from our colleague Marina Manzoni.
Very good. Thanks, Ronnie, and thanks for taking your role of moderating the chat and feeding in the questions. I think that's a very good one. Also, thanks, Marina, for the question. Any takers on this one? Please.
What we can see is that right at the moment now, there is a need for a focused, because it's sort of closed, focused competency lift. But I think towards your sort of field that it would be better for a wide, because as soon as you start doing projects, you get the more experience, and then you actually can look onto other areas to get inspired. I know that in Denmark, specifically for schools, you have the what do you call it? The pedagogical studies. They've made a sort of a closed chat GTP. They're testing that. They're doing projects with that part. You have other places like in for in social area where all different kinds of projects going on as well. But you can actually use the experience from these cases and see that you can use them in the other sides as well. If that answers the questions, Ronnie.
Very good. More additions? Sarah?
I want to add to that. I think it also comes back partially to that discussion whether AI is a tool we need to learn to use, or there's a more general awareness discussion around how we measure things affect how we look at certain policy problems, spotting bias and unintended consequences, even though you don't know how the engine works, right? So these larger questions of, are we shifting awareness around what AI does in society and in government, or is it a tool that people use to learn and is then applied in certain situations? So I think it's almost an underlying foundational discussion that we need to have in government, how we treat AI on a larger scheme.
Very good, very good. But maybe let's also redirect a little bit now the discussion, because there were also other messages in the chat hinting more also at the role of the private sector. So basically, there is also this question on how can the private sector help the public sector when it comes to using AI and potentially missing competences that you have in-house. It may also open this discussion on insourcing versus outsourcing, but I don't want to put more on the table now. Any immediate reaction on this one? Lendert, can we go with you first?
Sure. Okay, I started working for the municipality about 6 years ago, coming from a research institute. I thought things weren't as complex as they actually are. So being on the outside, I think, gives the wrong impression. And yes, this is self-criticism. I've also been a consultant before that, and then you're even more eager to sell before you actually know what's going on. So I want to just put that out as a word of warning, basically. If you're on the inside, it's much easier to see where things are more difficult. Maybe I'm a technology optimist, but at the same time, very realistic. So, and this realistic part is where, well, vendor systems, vendor lock-in, legislation, the non-willingness of people, all of this is a nice emulsification of problems. Regardless of how many cool technology bits and pieces you can throw at it, it doesn't solve the problem if it's not actually legal, being taken further, etc. And then all of a sudden you're there with a very big consultant bill to a private sector company, or maybe just a tool that you thought would solve a problem, but you don't, well, really know what the problem is. Does that sound familiar? So I think including private sector, I'm not against it, don't get me wrong, but I do think that many people don't really want to embrace the actual complexity that you're facing on all these three facets that are in the framework. I mean, maybe you're perfect at delivering a tool and you disregard all the other things. You need to see the full perspective, and that is what I really think is lacking all over. There may be some good examples of people that can cope with all of it, but I can't mention any of them.
Yeah, maybe taking on to that. So I think we do see a lot of, as you said, off-the-shelf things where they take stuff off the shelf and they say we tailored for you for your municipality, which is very tricky if you're not on the inside. I think the other thing that I've seen working with sort of local governments is also the access to microdata, so to actual data that is in neighborhoods, because it gets really tricky around privacy and GDPR regulations. So then what comes in handy is if companies are able to have sort of open data maps, for example, or open data things that comply with the rules, but then actually the municipality can go back and tap into these open data tools that are available. So this linkage, I think, is overlooked oftentimes, and it's a really important one. I know that people don't make money off of the open data things, but I think it's an important link anyway.
I can say a little bit about open data. We had a project a couple of years ago in a project called SumOpne, which means open together. We were multiple municipalities looking into, well, what was considered high value data sets. The results was that we figured out that, well, first of all, the data is not available in the format that is legal to publish, if you even can get it out of the system at all. It will be a high cost for the municipality to actually make it available. And the benefit for us is not very clear. Yes, maybe there will be a private actor that can tap into the data that then follows the structure, for all the municipalities that have made it available, and then perhaps can give some service, but there's a lot of uncertainties in there to justify the cost. So if the benefit is another place outside of the municipality, then it is very hard to defend the cost to actually make it available. However, if you think one step further and you make the open data the master data, then you actually might get the benefit, but I never managed to actually convince the right level in the municipality that that is a good idea. So there's a lot of, again, a lot of problems. I mean, all the ideas are very good, don't get me wrong, but the complexity, the willingness, the finances, all of that, unfortunately, are hindrances. I mean, we could have had this perfect system if only, but we're not at the if only just yet, unfortunately. And sorry if I sound negative. As I said,
you're not.
I'm realistic,
maybe I
but
could give you
optimistic.
reason to add the next more critical part, but also, of course, Christina, feel free. But I have a bit of a related question when also talking about this public sector, private sector relationship. It was mentioned before, the holy grail of procuring AI, So I think there is really, it is an area which definitely is identified as something to work on. There is work on AI clauses going on and how to procure ethical AI, etc., etc. However, it's still all in the making, and not a lot is really as ready to use as we may wish for. But there was a question in the chat also a bit related to procurement, but more looking also about standards and industry certification for AI systems. So do you have any take on that, if there should be industry standards and certification of AI systems provided by industry that could then be asked for also in public procurement to ensure that procured AI is ethical and following European values and what have you? Do you have any take on that also from a practical perspective?
I mean, I think we can learn a lot from other industries, right? So I did research on biotech, where there's also ethical question when it comes to stem cells. This is, of course, a completely different topic, but it raises this question within the EU. How competitive does the EU want to be compared to other countries? And how much are we focusing on the ethical dimension and the values that are embedded in the EU? And I think that's a question that needs to be asked. And I think that's what also the question touches upon, right? So is there an element of innovation policy and competitiveness in the market? Or are we value-based, ethical, and they go together sometimes, but not all the time. And then when you get at these intersections, then the question is, which path do you choose? Not that I have the answer.
Very well. Any take on this, Christina?
No, I was just thinking that was really clever, Sarah, because I think a lot of the problem is that you can run fast this way, but if you want to have a sort of standard, and if you want to do the EU way or the Danish way, you have other things to consider. And that I also think that's a lot of what's happening political in Denmark at the moment, is what kind of society do we want to have? Do we want the TikTok runaways, or do we want to sort of secure that our children have a sort of valuable upbringing? So I think it's a very much an ethical question, more, because I mean, everyone can run as fast. It's just a question is where we want to go. But if I can just bring shortly back to the private-public sort of connections, we try to do a lot of, and we have in our municipality, we're so lucky that we have a lot of big companies are situated here. So we also have a lot of there's a lot of money here, and in that way, so the more we can sort of interact, help each other out, learn from each other, the better it is. So we try to do a lot of different kinds of interactions, and we also use a lot of upstart companies in sort of when we do playing with new stuff, new technologies. So also in regards to because also we don't have the experts in-house as much, then we try to get others from outside to come in and sort of do the programming and developing with us. So we are very open to these things, but of course it's also within the closed doors, because we can't just let, as you say, Len, we can't just give it out, and data is also a lot of money, of course. Yeah.
Very well, very well. I think now we are also at some point going into a lot of directions when it comes to the competencies and governance of AI in the public sector. And I think we did cover a lot, and you started also a lot of interesting threads here. And we got even many more questions in the chat. We'll see how we can address them also after. No? So we have the log of the chat to see how we can take these questions on also after today's session. So please, if your question was not asked, bear with us. We see what we can do to answer. However, in the time left, I didn't want to miss the opportunity to ask you something else, getting a bit more practical. So actually, from the experience, what you were just sharing and your work in general, what ideas or recommendations or thoughts would you have to authorities at different levels? It can be local, can be national, can be European level. But what are your main suggestions, what public authorities could do to foster competencies for individuals or facilitate the development of appropriate governance practices? Any recommendations you would like to give us, a bit more practical than what we all elaborated before? Yes, please.
Yes, from my point of view, of course, it's towards the teacher training and the whole educational system, that there's a huge demand for development competencies. So putting out resources towards that sector is what I see.
Very well, to the point. Very good. More things to add? Lendert, Sarah?
Maybe one thing. The level of competence is important. Do you want to train people to be good prompt engineers, or you want people to be the ones that actually make the system in the end that reacts to these prompts? And we need both of them, but I think it's important that we have this division. And I think for the municipality, we need definitely more type of prompt engineers than engine engineers. Fortunately, we have a very good cooperation with NTNU, Patrick, and a lot of his students or at the ED department. So we do get a lot of interesting insights, but then how to make sure that these insights move on. So how I mentioned before, AI is often overpromising. So we need to show what the reality is of, maybe through a prototype. We use students or cooperate with students is a better way. So doing a bachelor or just another task to show that something is or is not working. Because if you want to listen to a vendor, of course, they try to sell you a unicorn with a lot of glitter on it, but it doesn't really exist. So if we instead can show, well, this very narrow case actually is useful for AI, and we do have the data. However, all the other promises, they don't work. I think that is an interesting way forward to maybe have a more realistic view on AI, because I think it's really overhyped. And I've been working with AI since '97 or so. It's not that I just jumped on the train last year. So yeah, what should I say? I'm optimistic but skeptical with regards to the promises.
Very good, very good. So here's our critical voice, but I think it's interesting because also we hear more and more, even talking about AI in the public sector, we hear more and more don't now jump on the large language models only. There are so many other AI in the public sector. Don't forget about it. And there are more other quick wins to have. So I think it's also good to have this more word of caution in our minds and not only think about AI in general. Christina first, but Sarah, of course, over to you in a couple of minutes.
I also think now we're just talking very much AI and the whole prompt engineering and all this stuff, but it also has about still working with the innovation culture in municipalities and public organizations, because I think if you have the sort of developing mindset everywhere, then you can sort of think of what are the problems that we can solve with, whether it be AI or anything else. So more the cultural change within the public sector.
Very
Yeah,
well.
I think
go ahead.
that very much aligns with what I wanted to say. I think this, so stepping back and looking at this EU concept of human-centric design, right? So then to ask, what is the added value that AI is giving our organization, right? And what are the values we already have? So basically, before we enter the highway of technological advancements, what are the core things that we stand for, right? As you said, Christina, what's the Danish way? What is the EU way? And then proactively sort of say, what is the added value of this new development? What are we adding on? And also, where are we setting the boundary and saying, this is not for us, we will not adopt this. So I think that's a very important part of that. And then I think coming back to the very first comment at the beginning of the discussion, the factor of time, right? Taking the time to actually think about, reflect on some of these technologies, because as you said, Leonard, they move fast, but not everything is new. There's just a little glitter on top to make it look new. So I think to really take the time to reflect on what's actually out there and what value it adds to the context that everyone is in.
Please, Leonard, go.
Yeah, I usually ask my colleagues, what is bothering you during a workday that you think could be solved with technology? Because that is what needs to be solved. All things that is not bothering them, just let them live with it. It's fine. And then you can look into it. Okay, if this problem is solved, what do you think you can actually do with it? And then we can look at a technology that might be able to solve your problem. And more often than not, it's not AI based. It's actually quite simple. Maybe some rule-based system or RPA even. I mean, very often you just need a very little nudge with technology to make life much better. So think small and then build for the bigger one, because I do want to put AI in everything I can, if it makes sense. And often it doesn't make sense. So
I see you moving to the more positive side now. No, but it's very interesting also. I will follow up just a direct question there, because if you talk to your colleagues, it's more related to these back office things. Do you also do something to reach out to the users of the public services you provide for a more front office view, or don't you? Just as a question.
No, I'm just hiding behind my desk.
That's fine. We need those people, and actually, back office, improving back office work, I think, and improving the work of your colleagues will make you very popular.
Yeah, no, the unit I work for is to support the other units that actually do have this front-facing capabilities. So I'm not supposed to work towards citizens.
No, and not a single person should do everything. We were talking about this before, who needs which competences. I think it's a very good point. Excellent. Christina, you want to add something as well? Or?
No, I'm still lost at the glittered unicorn. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. Great. No, but I think also what you were just saying, I think you made the moderation very easy. So thanks a lot for that. Really much appreciated. And I think also the breadth that you covered was really nice. And I hope also our participants here, we are still with more than 100 people listening in. So I think everybody enjoyed the discussion. I really hope also you took something valuable out of it. So again, thanks to the whole three of you. Really interesting, super insightful. Happy to follow up sometime and continue some of these discussions. But I think for now we can close the panel for today, and I will hand over to my dear colleague Luca to say a few closing words. But many thanks again, and see you soon.
Thank you, Sven.
Yeah, so thank you also from my side. I think it was a very great session. Have the luxury of being the last with some closing words. I think today we touch upon many things, no? And the word that I keep in my mind is complexity. We embraced a long list of competencies that are needed. We discussed about a long list of governance practices, and I think also with the panel we really went through all these need of embrace all this complexity that AI is actually bringing, especially probably in a world when this has some tension on like this off-the-shelves product that maybe a vendor can sell, or you can even find them online playing yourself with these AI tools. So I think this was a great discussion. And given that the topic is very complex, one webinar is definitely not enough to discuss everything that we need to discuss. That's why we organized 3 webinars to give you the chance to deep dive into different aspects of this very topic, very complex again topic on AI modernization, AI innovation in the public sector. So I really invite you to follow also our 2 next webinars. The next one is the 16th of May, in which we discuss more about the role of the private sector. We had some touch here with our panelists, but we really want to understand how the private sector and especially GovTech companies, so SME startups, innovative companies that are here in Europe can help fostering innovation in the public sector. So this will be the 16th of May. And the last webinar is on the 27th of May. And again, on that webinar, we come back discussing about AI. But that time we will have a very long, very rich results of a survey we spread around 7 EU countries. In that survey, we managed to understand which are the factors that influence the most AI adoption in the public sector. And you will see the results. It's a very long list of factors that, again, come back into this complexity. And let me also remind you that the survey is still open, so we're very much looking forward to have more people answering to our survey in order to enrich our base and also maybe going beyond the 7 countries we have right now. The survey is available nowadays in 8 languages, but will soon be available also in other EU languages. So I invite everyone here that is working for the public sector to fill the survey, because, and then is my very last message I want to convey. So with this Public Sector Tech Watch, we really want to create a knowledge hub, so a place in which people working on this topic, discussing about AI, experiences how to use AI, failing with some AI process and learning from their failures, can stay together and discuss and share practices, ideas. And we really believe that the European level is a very good level, if not the optimal level, to discuss about this topic. So going beyond the single country boundaries and discuss it as something that is a European discussion, a European innovation that we can go through all together. So that's the vision of our observatory, the Public Sector Tech Watch. So we really need people who are into our community, stay in touch with us, continue this discussion with us, join our webinars. And that's also, I think, very important for us. So again, last invitation, subscribe to our observatory, because that's the only way we can then contact you. We'll share the results. So with Ronnie and Patrick, we will write a report. And this report will be, of course, published, so you can have a look. The slides, the registration, everything will be published. So thank you very much. And I hope you enjoyed the discussion today. And I hope we can see you soon, very soon, so the 16th of May for the next webinar. So thank you very much. Thank you again to our panelists and to all the people that organized this.
Excellent. Thank you. Goodbye. Take care.
Thank you.